have been 2,775 exonerations. That's almost 25,000 years lost. My name is Allison Flowers. I'm an investigative journalist in Chicago. I work at a nonprofit journalism production company called the Invisible Institute. In Chicago, our murder solve rate is very low. And that rate is even lower if you're Black or brown. And so if you're a person of color, you are less likely, your family is less likely to have police really dig into your case and try to solve it for you. And so the race of the victim is a determinant in whether police prioritize your case. And so we were really putting the system on trial.
The history of exoneration, essentially the official absolvement of an individual from a crime in America, can be traced back centuries ago, when our nation was young and our judicial system's foundation was being set in stone. False witnesses were nothing new back then, and one of the only ways those who were convicted were released was if lies and secrets were revealed. This all changed when DNA forensic science was implemented in 1986. This new method of identification led to the first U.S. conviction in 1987 based on DNA evidence, specifically of Tommy Lee Andrews, and the first exoneration based on DNA evidence, the case that convicted Gary Dotson in 1989. Gary Dotson was tragically convicted of aggravated kidnapping and rape and sentenced to prison for 25 to 50 years in 1979. He served 10 of those years, eventually being freed by false serology and hair analysis that didn't match him to the crime. So what is DNA forensic evidence? Specifically, it could be anything that could identify a specific suspect, such as blood, fingerprints, hair, saliva, and old used clothing. Forensic serology is a branch of forensic sciences dealing with identification and characterization of biological evidentiary samples such as blood, semen, saliva, sweat, breast milk, and other bodily fluids. In investigations, it is used to determine who the DNA belongs to. According to the Chicago Tribune, between 2 to 10% of the prison population is innocent, meaning that there are potentially 46,000 to 230,000 people who are being punished for no reason. With all of these ways to match identification and criminals to the crime, why is that bad things happen to relatively good people, specifically innocent people being convicted for crimes they didn't commit? Well, we already identified unreliable scientific evidence in which around 71% of exonerations have been based on false scientific testimonies by professionals who would lie and sell out one for a price. Bad lawyers and misconduct from prosecutors are also reasons why the innocent are convicted, because those who are convicted most of the time don't have money for the best defense lawyers. They are often stuck with newer court-appointed lawyers that aren't able to perform as well. Some prosecutors will swear under oath to be honest throughout their law career, but lie to judges, jurors, bring in fake experts and eyewitnesses to make up stories, and even neglect to acknowledge evidence that could prove the guilty innocent. And don't think that judges are exempt. They can also play a role. Some judges ignore compelling, honest evidence and trust false ones. Some don't necessarily do their jobs and wait till re-election to promise justice for all. Eyewitness error is when an eyewitness misidentifies an innocent suspect. Eyewitness error is when an eyewitness misidentifies an innocent suspect and constantly gets the wrong people in a jail cell. It is also one of the biggest reasons for wrongful convictions. Some who are present at crime scenes often have trouble recalling what actually happened. With this, along with police swaying witnesses through manipulated lineups of photo and physical evidence, no wonder eyewitness error occurs. Finally, bad police work is one of the most significant ways innocent people are convicted. This police work has not only broken the trust of many marginalized communities that they were sworn to protect and serve, but has also led to some of the most significant moments in U.S. law enforcement history, such as the exoneration of the Central Park Five.
My name is James Kluppelberg. I grew up in Chicago, Illinois, and I was arrested and wrongfully convicted for 3 counts of aggravated arson and 18 counts of murder.
My name is Antoine Day. I was arrested for first degree attempt murder. I was arrested for numerous other counts, 2 counts of first degree attempt murder, and unlawful UUW, all kind of things, that they sprinkle on there once they just really try to bury you in that hole. And they stole 14 years of my freedom. They sentenced me. My cases were kind of wild at first. They sentenced me to it all came out to 95 years. But the court straightened it, so I ended up doing, they gave me 60 years. And then I ended up doing 14 of those. So, it was just one of those things where it all happened one summer. One summer on the west side of Chicago.
My name is Jacques Rivera. I grew up in the inner city in Humboldt Park. They ended up convicting me on it. Sentenced me to 85 years. He gave me 60 for the murder, 20 years additional for brutal heinous, because the victim was shot 11 times. And then he gave me 5 years for the gun. I was subjected to be convicted on a murder based on one single identification. They took a big portion of my life. 21 years of my life. I didn't see my kids grow up.
A local bar. It's just a mile down the street, so I just walk it, and was arrested for manifestation.
My name is Christine Bunch, and I arson. I lost almost 17 years of my life in a maximum security women's facility in Indianapolis, Indiana. Basically, I was a single mom with a beautiful 3-year-old son. I woke up one morning to discover that my home was on fire and I couldn't get my child out. And neighbors come over and held me back because at that time the flames were going through the roof.
The Central Park Five, now known as the Exonerated Five, are a group of minorities who are charged with the rape and assault of Trisha Meili, a female jogger in Central Park in 1989. At the time, the men were teenagers and coerced by the police into giving false confessions through various methods of torture. By December 11, 1990, all the boys were convicted and taken to prison. On June 12, 2002, over a decade later, a man named Mateus Reyes came forward and confessed to actually being the one who attacked the Central Park jogger. In 2003, 3 of the men sued the city of New York for malicious prosecution, racial discrimination, and emotional distress. The city then refused to pay any settlement because they believed the police did everything right in the situation and the defendants had a fair trial. In 2014, a civil rights lawsuit was settled. The 5 were exonerated and awarded a $41 million settlement. In 2016, the men were granted $3.9 million for additional damages such as emotional distress while incarcerated. Another example is the John Burge torture case. Another example are the John Burge torture cases. John Burge was a detective and commander in the Chicago Police Department from 1972 to 1991. He was known to torture people of color and minorities through violence in order to get them to make false confessions. Many people were protesting this as it showed how the police department did not care about the racist cops that they had, and it showed that the police department would tolerate this violent racist behavior. This also led protesters to think that if the police department allowed for this kind of torture within their buildings, there must have been worse things that police officers could have done while they were out on the streets. Torture survivor Daryl Cannon noted that during his experience he was called racial slurs and saw that the police officers were getting enjoyment out of the pain that they were causing him. Many other torture victims stated that the torture they received would eventually get to the point where they could not handle it, so they would say anything Burge wanted them to in order for the torture to stop. There are over 200 John Burge cases known where John Burge tortured people into making false confessions. In 2015, the Invisible Institute created an online portal that gathered thousands of CPD misconduct claims. In 2016, the city of Chicago paid 57 John Birch victims $5.5 million in reparations. And to think that there could be so many innocent people who don't deserve to be imprisoned but were convicted by our justice system is astounding. These people lost their livelihoods, their relationships with their families and friends, their dignity, and could potentially be dealing with mental health issues and seemingly insurmountable trauma that hasn't been treated. This is why those who work to take on these cases and free these individuals should never go unnoticed. Activists, celebrities, journalists, and paralegals who bring attention to, write about, and dig into these cases are the reason why there are thousands in America who have been exonerated. Here we have paralegals Carl Leonard and Julia Mooson from the Exoneration Project to talk more about the process of exonerating the incorrupt.
By the time we're involved in a case, someone has already been arrested. There may have been a warrant where a judge determined there was probable cause for their arrest. There might have been a warrant to search their place, so there's probable cause to search their place. They may or may not have given some sort of statement or confession to the police. They will have appeared before a judge for what's called their initial appearance, and the judge will have decided that there's reason to either hold them in prison or in jail or to continue the case against them. They'll have the opportunity to plead guilty or not guilty. And then there will be all sorts of pretrial proceedings where the judge will determine whether or not the confession is going to be suppressed, or does the jury get to hear it? Will these pieces of evidence be suppressed, or will the jury get to hear those? Should the indictment be dismissed or not? Then there's a trial, and the individual has the opportunity to defend themselves or not, whatever sort of defense they choose to put on. The state has the burden of proof there, beyond a reasonable doubt, the highest standard that exists in our justice system. And the person will have been convicted. Then there will have been post-trial motions where the defense will file a motion saying, the jury got it wrong. There wasn't sufficient evidence to convict me. This piece of evidence should have come in. Whatever it is, they will have lost those motions. Then they'll appeal, and they'll have appealed to the intermediate level appellate court. 3-judge panel will have affirmed their conviction. Then they have the opportunity to appeal to the Illinois Supreme Court, which doesn't have to take the case. They take very few cases. So in all likelihood, they decided that they were not interested in hearing this appeal. Maybe they heard it. Either way, our potential client will have lost at the Illinois Supreme Court. Then they probably will have filed, before we get involved, some post-conviction petitions on their own, which is a chance to say that, I shouldn't be in jail. I should never have been convicted. These are the reasons why. They will probably have filed 1 or 2 or more of those in state court, and probably 1 in federal court on their own before we get involved. And they will have lost all of those. So by the time we get involved, this person has been convicted by a jury, and that conviction has been approved by many judges. So our job then is to come in and say, all of you got it wrong. Everybody who thinks this person was right, from the witnesses who identified our client, to the police, to the judges, to the jury, to the appellate court judges, you're all wrong. Nobody wants to hear that. And so the way it works is we have to bring evidence that's new, evidence that was not presented to the jury in the first instance and could not have been discovered with diligence. There has to be something that's totally new. And we come forward with that evidence and say, if the jury knew this, then maybe they wouldn't have convicted this person.
So essentially, people will write us from all across the country. So actually, the place that my laptop is 3 bankers boxes stacked on top of each other that are filled with letters from people across the country that are seeking representation. And so sometimes we'll receive a letter that we find incredibly compelling, and we'll be like, hey, you should take a look at this. And other times we will find people will call, there's so many people that are supporters or family members that call and are like, hey, listen, and they advocate for their loved ones that are incarcerated, which is really important as well.
And I would write letter after letter after letter to every lawyer in the Sullivans. I started with the A's and I just kept going, asking for somebody to help me. Probably 400 or 500 letters. Jane Raley was the director of Northwestern's Innocence Project. Jane sent down these two students who then went back to Jane and said, hey, we got to help this guy. He don't belong there. We spent 4 hours with him, and yeah, if even half of what he tells us is true, he don't belong there.
Improvements in recent years around compensation for exonerees. 35 states, the federal government, and DC do compensate exonerees. Where it's difficult, though, is that that compensation is not hitting their pockets when they leave prison, which is when they need the money the most, right? And to qualify for that compensation, often they're put in the same position they were when they were appealing, which was proving that they were innocent again, not proving that they weren't guilty. That's what happens at the original trial, right? It's much harder to prove innocence than to prove not guilt, right? And so what we see is a slow, difficult process to getting that compensation.
Many people don't get compensation from the government, let alone a sorry. So you got to look at all these families who lost people in the prison industrial complex due to mental health, due to death in the prisons, and many people don't even get a I'm sorry. And unless we bring public attention to these situations, that people get at least I'm sorry, or at least like this is what happened. And so no, I did not get any compensation.
Prayed and I asked the Lord to give me what he thought I seemed right, best for me, and that's what I would want. I'm happy with it. And it's not so much about the money with me. It's about being the vindication of it and holding those liable who need to be held liable for this. And there's still more of them.
Illinois has a circuit breaker system in place. If you are declared innocent, you're only allowed so much money. It is based every year, it goes up a little more. At the time of my declaration of innocence, it was $214,000. It's prorated for the amount of years that you spend in custody, and it closes out at 14 years. I then filed a civil suit against the city of Chicago. I settled with the city for $9.3 million that was owed money for their various roles in my release and everything. I was cut a check for $2 million.
Still to this day, 14 states do not have compensation laws, in addition to an observed gap between what men, women, and trans people receive. So we decided to focus on one aspect, being the different issues women face as a whole within the justice system.
Inside the community, I've heard anecdotally that men's prisons are, much more violent, much more unsafe, and just, that much more torturous for the men inside, for the people inside. Certainly women are extremely vulnerable in a prison population. There's a lot of sexual abuse that goes on at the hands of correctional officers. And so it's hard to pay experiences. I think a lot of it comes down to which prison and where. Certainly some conditions are better than others, but in the end, mass incarceration is torture. And I think that it's really important from a human rights perspective that we recognize that. On the outside, however, I would say that women are wrongly convicted for different reasons than men typically. Oftentimes there's an element of bad science in their case where, the science hasn't caught up to the evidence, right? And they may have had some bad experts testifying to what happened. And that's because women are often wrongfully convicted because they were taking care of someone who fell ill or got hurt, and they're the only adult around. So often this involves children, sometimes their own children. And because women often perform those roles in the world, when something goes wrong and someone gets hurt, they're a person there to blame. And that means that when they're released from prison, it can be really challenging for them to reconnect with their communities and their families, because those people may not have caught up to the fact that they were really innocent and that they really didn't do this crime and that it was an accident or it was a misunderstanding of the medical evidence or whatever the case may be. So I do think that women sometimes have a harder time reconnecting and being supported by the community that they're returning to because of that.
Trying to find more cases with women has become one of our priorities as far as like the intake process goes. And that's because you're right, you know, like if you go on the national registry of exonerees, I mean, if you just look, so many of these kind of exoneration stories are about men, and that's for two reasons, right? Obviously, Black and Latino men are overcriminalized in this country, and so we have, you know, the mass incarceration rates that do affect them simply like on a data-based percentage kind of, that's what I'm looking here, ratio. So like to that extent, it's like, sure, the numbers are going to be higher. But that being said, we have been trying to make a more constant, concerted effort to, because there are women that are wrongfully incarcerated. There's actually a lot of women that are wrongfully incarcerated or convicted. And Carl, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the cases we currently have that are women like exonerees have to do very much with kind of like tangential crimes and or crimes with children. And I think that's another big piece of it, is that it's really hard to, not that it's easy, but a lot of our other cases have to do with, you know, police misconduct or, well, no, it's mostly police misconduct. It's like 9 times out of 10, it's police misconduct. And that being said, it's kind of like, it really skews it. But as far as taking the cases, once we have a case that's like a woman, exoneree or client, or however you kind of want to label that, is it's the same. I mean, and Carl, this is when you can kind of talk about it. Like, I haven't experienced any significant difference in the way that we handle cases, and that we handle every case that we have with care and attention and dedication. So, but as far as finding the cases, we do have to not go out of our way, but we try to pay more attention to women who are asking for assistance.
Women are definitely categorized, I would say, different than men. I mean, men show up for trial and they're looking, do they have a good haircut and a clean shirt? With women, they're talking about their hairstyle and their makeup and how they're dressed. And you can make a whole story about a woman if, you know, you think her hair's too blonde and maybe she's a party girl, or her makeup's too dark. So I had a male public defender who told me, you know, your hair's too blonde and it's too big, and your makeup is too dark, and don't wear any. Don't cry, because, you know, they'll say you're overly emotional. I just want you to, no matter what they say, don't react. He said, don't show any cleavage, any throat. He said, because, you know, then they can say that you're a loose woman. And he said, you were already a single mom, so they already think that. So during trial, they presented that in the state of Indiana, it's not a requirement to prove motive. So there was no motive. Then they presented the fireman who had said that he had to go through the wall to get my son out. And 2 weeks before trial, he changed that statement to say, no, he went through the doorway, but he had to go over a chair that I had shoved in the doorway to keep my son in there. And then they had the chemist from the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms who testified that he had found accelerant in the living room and in my son's bedroom, but he couldn't identify it. So basically at that point, I knew that I was going to get found guilty. I'm a mom, and I couldn't sit on a jury and hear that accelerant had been found in a child's bedroom and not convict. So I told my family, I know I'm going to be convicted.
Many people are being targeted under these manifestation laws and these loitering with the attempt just because they are trans, a woman, or have condoms, right? Where just like if you were a man walking around with condoms, you're practicing safe sex. But if you're a woman or a trans person, then you are a sex worker. But you cannot be a person who just have condoms on there, because as many times where it's a woman's responsibility for her sexual health, right? Because we see where laws are impacting, and this branches out to where women don't have the right to have access to birth control. And so women are being charged with these manifestation laws because they have access to condoms. And so sex work and these laws branches out to a whole lot of other movements besides just sex work. It impacts migrant people, because a lot of migrant people get charged with these manifestation laws. And because they run in Arizona, they run just like if you were charged with a prostitution, you still, that impacts your migrant status, right? So you cannot get a visa because it's a humanities violation. So you cannot get, if you are deported, you cannot come back into this country or get a visa back into this country.
We have now looked at issues from the differences between compensation and the treatment surrounding men, women, and trans people. But we were curious to see what other factors of the justice system were effective or not effective.
So what is like a misconception about the justice system some may believe?
Everything. So the justice, so everyone thinks like it's in the name justice, right? But it's not, right? It is a system of oppression coming out of the post-slavery era, right? And so we think that like if you are innocent, the court will find you innocent. If you're guilty, then you are found guilty. But most of the time, innocent people are being arrested. People are used to build money for the city, right? And
A friend of mine was just reading the newspaper and saw an article with my name in it. He say, your name Antoine Day too, ain't it? I was like, yeah, stop playing with me, man. He was like, no. He was like, no. He said, I see something in the newspaper about you. I was like, yeah, right. He said, hey, man, I'm not lying to you. I'm serious. I see something in the paper about you. And I'm like, what is it? He said, they got an article say your case is overturned. And I looked at him like he was crazy. And just didn't believe that this was happening. So I walked over and I looked at the article because I didn't believe him. I looked at the article, and the article said that my case had been overturned. Now, mind you, I have a new lawyer, right? Named Howard Joseph, Mr. Joe. I have a new lawyer. Had never heard anything from the state's attorney, anything from the court, because you only had so much time to file before they shoot it down and they send it back, and you have to do it all over again. And I went in and called Mr. Joe. I called him and I was like, Mr. Joe, it's an article in the Tribune about my case being overturned. Mr. Joe, who has a mouth like a sailor, he said all kind of stuff. Oh, this is BS. Oh, this is garbage. Don't believe that, SHIT when he said, don't believe it. It's just garbage, I was like, no, Mr. Joe, this is the real article in the Tribune. He was like, well, who wrote it then? He was yelling, he was screaming, he was like, don't bother me, it's just garbage, So I told him who wrote the article. I told him what date it's in the newspaper. So Mr. Joe, who was already like 79 years old, pretty much, and he had got out of criminal law and was just doing real estate law. But when he read my case, he took my case and he wanted to defend. He wanted this to be his last case, which it was. So he took it to, he went and he filed the motion and everything on my behalf. So then they came and got me. He took me back to the county jail where I stayed two years, you know, and miserably 2 years. I mean, it's the worst 2 years of my life. This place is hell. And thank God it wasn't a pandemic then. You know what I'm saying? I would probably been dead. But we went through that, and I got released. Mr. Joe got, you know, they released me. We went back to court. State's attorney showed up, and so we were all standing in the courtroom. So the judge said, "Mr. Day, you ready to go home?" And I just didn't know what to do. You know what I'm saying? I hadn't expected this. You know, they called us up to the court one day, but every day Mr. Joe will come and see me. The entire 2 years, whenever he comes to me, say, "You ready to go home? You got some clothes? Or you got some shoes? You ready to go home? Get out the car, MFer. Get on the ground, you mother." All kind of stuff. They screaming and yelling. They doing what they've been trained to do. You know, none of them think. They just doing what they've been trained to, like dogs. You just train this dog to attack, and that's all it does is attack. So they kept attacking. They calling me names. I say, wait a minute. If y'all listen to me for one moment, I got 3 little kids in this van. I have no weapons. I just got off work. I was dusty like I was today. I don't have any weapons. My daughter then, she was 4. No, she was 5. Man was 6, and my baby boy was a year old. And my kids they strapped in car seats. They opened the door. They put the guns in my kids' face. Today my kids hadn't forgotten it, and they hate police. You know, white police especially, but they hate police. I've tried to teach them not to hate police. The methods is what you should hate. You should fight against the methods. Become a cop and change the cop. You know what I'm saying? That's what I try to teach them. So when they did that, they were angry because I wouldn't lay on the ground. It's raining. They want me to lay face down on the ground. I said, well, you may as well start shooting now, because I'm not laying on the ground. And I bagged away from the car so they wouldn't shoot my kids. And they yelling, and the kids are screaming and crying. They're like, "Daddy, please, Daddy, please." You know, it's sad that we have to go through that as a people. And they had no reason. They told me that my van that I owned was stolen. It's a stolen vehicle. I said, "Sir, this van is in my name. My license is in my hand. My insurance is in my hand, and it'll show you clearly that I own this vehicle." He said somebody called my van and said it was stolen. They was willing to take my life over a lie. You see what I'm saying? These are the things we have to change. They were willing to shoot me because he kept saying, "You're reaching like you got a gun." I said, "My hand is high in the sky. I can touch a cloud. My hands are so high in the air. You know, but I'm not laying on the ground." And I kept asking him to get your commanding officer. I'm not laying on the ground. You know, so they came, they settled it down. They got this idiot, got him away from.
You go to the United States Supreme Court, but you have to file a writ of certiorari to go to the United States Supreme Court. And guess who approves that? The federal courts, who just denied you. So at that point, I was like, I got to do 42 and a half years for something I didn't do.
The system is broken. It's severely broken in Illinois. However, I still believe it is the best system around. That's why I will speak to anybody that wants to hear about what I went through, because every person I speak to is a potential juror, and they're going to tell my story to their friends. "Hey, I met this guy today. This is what I found. Look, this is his story." And if I reach just one person that ends up on a jury that questions what that police officer is saying and not just taking it as truth because he's wearing a badge, and the motives of a state's attorney when, you know, a drug addict is up there testifying and getting their freedom, those types of things, and actually just thinking about things in a different light. If I can do that just to one person and save one person from going through what I went through, then I've accomplished a very large goal.
I definitely think that You know, our justice system, even our police force, they get a lot of bad press. And so just because the system failed me, just because we don't always get it right, doesn't mean that everybody within that system is bad. So I feel like a lot of times we gloss that over and just focus on the bad. The system was set up to design and designed to work. It is supposed to punish the people that did something wrong and vindicate the people that shouldn't be there. For whatever reason, we've allowed the people that work within that system to have unlimited powers and resources. And that is how our system has been brought down. It's not the system, it's the people. And until we figure out a way that we can make that right, that we can make sure that the police officers that are doing something wrong are out of our forces, and we're concentrating on the people that do something right, I don't think it'll ever be fixed.
As we reflect on our justice system, it remains as something that is out of our control. However, there are many aspects of one's court proceedings or investigations that we can control. So we decided to ask if anyone would change anything if they could go back in time.
I think everybody, I mean, unfortunately, I don't think that our educational system goes far enough when kids are in grade school and high school to teach constitutionality anymore. And it's paramount because you, as the accused, know the case, the accusations, the where you were, know the history, everything better than anybody else. If you do not know what your rights are, and your appointed attorneys or attorneys that you pay for do not take the time to explain these things to you, you're behind the eight ball from the beginning. You're already 10 legs behind.
And I kept telling him, I was like, man, what is the problem? I said, you picked me up this first time. You want me to be a filler, you know, and I cooperated with you, which, by the way, is a dangerous thing to do. It's to stand in a lineup, but during those times, you have no other choice.
There's nothing I could have changed. I didn't have the resources to get a better attorney. I knew that, you know, my family was going to have to help me with my unborn child, and I had literally lost everything. So there was nothing in that moment that could be changed. When this first happened, and, you know, 20 minutes after I got to the hospital, the detectives were there to interview me. If I could change that, I wouldn't have talked, and I would have requested an attorney.
You know what? So like me, the movement, no, I wouldn't change anything like that, but I would change the way that my story was put out. Like I will be the sole narrator of my story, and I would have saved a lot more money to prepare myself for the situation. So everything else, no, I wouldn't change, but I would change how certain things were done, like on my behalf, right? So like, hey, after like a while, I ran through all my savings. I really wish that like I would have used resources outside of Arizona and like went to like New York or Jersey or somewhere else outside of Arizona to retreat while my court case was going on and then fly back in for it. So I wish I would have done that.
Acknowledging what went wrong or right is equally as important as sharing their story to start the conversation on what reforms need to take place.
Detective Ronaldo Guevara, who has wrongfully convicted since the early 80s, 57 young Latino men out of the Humboldt Park area. And there's only 12 of us who got out of the 57. So the rest are currently still sitting in prison for murders they didn't do. So if one thing I would have to say though, is to deal truthfully and honestly in all aspects of life, wherever it may be, because it's going to come back to bite you.
I have to trust that the person that's an expert, that the person that works at our government level is going to tell the truth. And if he doesn't, and I discover that, there's nothing I can do to him. He gets off scot-free because he has immunity. I have to prove that he maliciously did that to me before I can say, oh, well, I should be compensated. You should do something to make that right for me. You stole my life. You stole my dreams. You stole my future. You stole everything. And I can do nothing to him. And for me, that doesn't sit right within our judicial system, because if I tell a lie on you and take 17 years of your life, you can come out and you can sue me. You can make me go to jail for what I've done. I should have the same right if somebody in power does that. I'm given a public defender. Don't get me wrong, I am not going to slam public defenders. They are the backbone of our system. But they don't have an easy time of it. They're overworked, they're underpaid, and they don't have the same resources as the prosecution. So how on earth can you mount a defense to take on an endless checkbook when you have very limited resources? So from the get-go, I felt like I was going in there with half an attorney, because he knows what we need. He knows what we should be doing. We just can't afford it. And the court's not going to give you resources for the investigators you need for an arson case. So that was the first part. The second part was there was no way that I would know that something is missing from discovery. There's no way that my attorney would know that. We're expecting the state to turn over everything they've got. That is what I'm supposed to be able to count on and go with. The fact that you withheld the original report that stated no accelerant had been found in my son's bedroom, that the accelerant you did find was in a circular pattern on the floor of the living room, not on the carpet, not on the carpet padding, but on the wood underneath where the previous owner had told you he had a kerosene heater. You found faint traces of kerosene in that wood. Nothing else, the clothes, the furniture, the carpet, all that tested negative. But that report wasn't presented to my jury. Instead, you used the one saying you couldn't identify the accelerant.
The initial stages were that a very zealous, wanting to make their names, police officers and state's attorney took the uncorroborated word of a multiply convicted drug addict whom they were releasing in exchange for his testimony. I mean, that in itself should pretty much sum up how uncredible those types of witnesses and testimony are, because our legal system says you cannot pay a witness for their testimony. However, what is more valuable than a man's freedom? And so they can give you your freedom in exchange for your testimony. They just can't give you cash. I was a large part of what was passed called the snitch bill in Illinois, which mandates that jailhouse informants be given a lot more scrutiny, that the judge actually has to conduct a hearing prior to them even being allowed to testify in front of a jury. That's something that should be adopted nationwide. State's attorneys should not be allowed to purchase testimony with things like giving a man his freedom. If a guy is going to come up and tell the truth, or a girl is going to come up and tell the truth, the criminal, whatever, she's going to do it. She should do it, or he should do it, because they're telling the truth, not that they're going to be released or their time's going to get cut. And state's attorneys claim that that would tie their hands if they can't make these deals. Well, you shouldn't have to make these deals if you have the evidence to rightfully convict somebody. One of the largest things that I need, that I would love to see changed in our society, that is more transparency. All interviews should be video recorded when they're interviewing a suspect.
In an effort to bring change, many of our interviewees have started their own organization to help anyone else who has experienced what they did and to become an extra resource in a world where little help is given.
The Outlaw Project is named after Sharmus Outlaw, who I met through a mutual friend of ours. And we met at the Desiree Alliance, which is a national sex worker conference that was amazing, where I got to meet with a lot of people. And Sharmus Outlaw passed away a couple of years ago, and we wanted to honor her. And so we started the Sharmus Outlaw Project. And that is surrounding policy work, HIV policy, sex worker rights, trans issues. And we are talking about intersectionality, about being Black, being trans, or being a woman, being a sex worker, and how these all connect and into other movements and intersectionality. And so right now we're starting our tiny home project, where we are trying to build tiny homes for trans women, either in Phoenix or Tucson, depending on the best location for us. And so that's what the Outlaw Practice is doing really good right now, and doing right now too.
The way I feel right now is grabbing young people like yourself who can see it, give you all these things, these tools you need to work with, and point you in the right direction. I work with Loyola Law School. I have a program called Life After Justice. If you ever get a chance, look it up. Me and Jared Adams, who's now a strong attorney. Oh man, strong attorney. And he's an exoneree as well. So these are the people that I like to do my thing with, people that's willing to fight for a cause that can affect us 300 years later on. So that's the history I want to.
So Just Is for Just Us, or J for J, as I call it, is solely about helping exonerees. And that could be with anything. I mean, people don't realize, look at yourself. When you get up first thing in the morning, look at everything you use. Shampoo, toothbrush, toothpaste, deodorant, clothes. You take a shower, make your own coffee. You have your own mug, your own coffee maker, your own microwave. They have none of that. I walked out with a prison uniform, a pair of white tennis shoes. I didn't have an ID. I didn't have a toothbrush. If I didn't have family, I would have had none of that. So when I went in to ask for help with my resume from the reentry program, they were said, oh yeah, sure, we can help, until they found out I no longer had a conviction. And then they told me I wasn't eligible for that program. So J for J is all about, hooking people up with community volunteers to get them what they need, get help with a resume. If we know somebody is coming home, if their lawyer reaches out that they have been exonerated, then we send them a welcome home box, and I have volunteers that will go shop, and they love to go get them first time boxes with lots of samples so they can try different things and see how things have changed. But ours is kind of unique because we also offer an opportunity for in-kind donations. So business owners and doctors can donate services directly to an exoneree, and I can give them a tax letter for that.
I have PTSD. I have no other choice. Use my PTSD is that it makes me talk about it. It makes me talk about the problem. It makes me look for solutions. It don't make me want medication. It don't make me want to hurt nobody. It don't make me want to do none of that. See, it's what you do with it. It's not what they do. It's how you react to it. And how I'm reacting to it is in a positive manner. And I want to go. I got a buddy who called me Dr. King because he said, man, when you get on the floor, you don't stop. Because I know if we don't talk about it, there's no fixing this problem. There's no fixing it. And yeah, I got post, PTSD because in so many ways it affects me, but I don't let it hinder me. I know it's there. I can identify it when it comes up. I can identify when the police pull me up and I go to shaking. I go to trembling, like, I don't know what to do. Put my hands on the steering wheel, let the window down, lock the doors, or don't let the window down. I don't know what to do. And that's PTSD. When you go into a panic mode, your heart beats even faster and you hadn't done anything. They put the light on you. It's all intimidated, So that's PTSD. When the first thing he get out of the car, he grab his gun.
And he goes, hey, can we go somewhere like there's a coffee house down the street. Can we go over there and talk? She's like, sure. So while in the car going to the coffee house, he just starts crying. He starts crying and he goes, I've been looking for years. Ooh. He's been waiting for somebody to find him, to tell him the truth. He said it wasn't me. He tried to tell the police that back in 1988. He tried to tell the police that it wasn't me. And they made him identify me. And, he lived with this burden for so long. He said that he has 3 kids and he can't even look at his kids in the face, not knowing whatever happened to me. He knew it was wrong. He knew it was wrong, even at the age of 12. And he's just waiting for somebody to find him. He says he sees stories about this all the time, that people come looking for the eyewitness. And he said, you're at my doorstep. And he said, I want to tell the truth. And that's all I wanted. That's all I wanted was the truth. If they would have kept me in prison, I wouldn't care. I've been in there for 20 plus years already. It didn't matter. It became a part of me. I just wanted the truth to be told. I didn't kill this kid. And if I did, I would be a man and take my responsibilities. I'm not fancy. I don't wear gold. I don't, I got me a nice vehicle. Let's just say that. And people's like, man, that's a nice car. And I say, well, thank you. Thank you for buying it for me. They look at me like, why don't you take it for? I said, do you know that your tax dollars, where your tax dollars are going? Ashley Reyes, can we use our tax dollars to put her through school, or all these other kids, instead of giving them to wrongfully convicted men and women because these cops don't want to do their job? We could do so much more money with our tax dollars.